Welcome, I'm Amber Ward, and for this series of conversations, we'll be exploring an array of what contributes to energetic intelligence, including biohacking, consciousness hacking, and creating communities that empower people through their personal sovereignty. If you'd like to discover more about how to live a life unlimited or how you can work with me, head on over to lifeunlimited.net. That's life, UNLTD.net, and I'll catch you there. And for this episode, we're joined by Corrie Brundage in celebration of a very special 3rd year anniversary, which we'll share with you in the show. Corrie is a New Yorker, former model and personal trainer, and is currently a writer and fellow biohacker. She's a suicide, coma, and brain injury survivor who helps women heal from painful, toxic relationships while they achieve ultimate health and fitness. She's obsessed with cats, pole dancing, and reruns of The Sopranos. Now, this episode does come with a trigger warning as we deep dive straight into some important matters of the heart and mental health. Corrie, welcome and thank you for joining us. This is the lead up to a 3-year anniversary of really an entirely new way of living for you. And to celebrate, I'd be really honored if you would share that journey with us.
Sure. So almost exactly 3 years ago, coming up in a few days, I attempted suicide. Actually by overdosing on a euthanasia drug. So that was pretty serious. I'm minimizing it. I wasn't pretty serious. I was very serious. But surprise, surprise, I, didn't succeed. But what happened was I ended up in a coma. I was comatose for almost 4 days. And there was a real danger that if I did survive, if my body did survive, I would be in a vegetative state. Because in the coma, there wasn't much higher brainwave activity going on. I was pretty gone. But I woke up and they took out my tube and I wasn't severely brain damaged. I had a mild brain injury, and that wasn't really something that I came to be aware of until months later. Nobody really talked to me about the neurological after effects, and so that was so surreal. That was a real strange sort of purgatorial state I was in for a very long time. But yeah, I woke up, and then I immediately went into drug withdrawal because not only had I overdosed on a massive amount of a very specific compound, but for many years prior to the suicide attempt, I was taking large doses of benzodiazepines, which is like Valium, Klonopin. So they took me through withdrawal from all of that. And that was yet another marathon that my body went through. But I survived that. And I came home and I decided I would be a fool. More than anything, I would be a fool if I didn't make something of myself and of my life. So I just started researching. I saw a neurologist and my psychiatrist, and they were all just kind of, traditional Western medical models of there's nothing we can do. Your recovery from brain injury will take however long it's going to take. And even then, you're still never going to feel like you did before. And my psychiatrist basically assured me that I would always be mentally ill, that I would likely have another major depressive episode and suicide attempt. And that last meeting with him, I stood up and I said something along the lines of, okay, well, I'll show you, I'll show you. And so that's what I've been doing. Not just showing people who doubted that I was capable of recovery and not just surviving, but thriving, but becoming even better than I ever was, even when I was healthy. And that's sort of what led me to biohacking and neurohacking and sort of uncovering my brain and body potential and just, really trying to lead by example like that, that people who are out there and feel that they're hopeless and that they can't ever get better. I would just say get curious, because traditional Western medical models probably aren't addressing all of the ways that they can help you. Get curious, start experimenting, start reading, start researching. There is healing. So that's what I've been doing for 3 years.
The part of your journey that I find so inspiring and that gives me full body goosebumps right now as you retell it is that part of your spirit that stopped in that moment and said, I'll show you, as though there was that part of inside of you that knew you were about to embark on a really new journey ahead.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I was not aware of that ability within myself until my suicide attempt. I had no idea I was capable of that kind of resiliency.
And Corrie, we met through a biohacking group and very quickly connected via our love of all things biohacking and neurohacking, but also in the sentiment we both take around a holistic approach to well-being, and specifically around rewiring our brain.
Exactly, because it's all interconnected.
Would you like to share some of your lifestyle approaches around, say, nutrition, for example, that you've embraced during your healing process?
Which, again, isn't something that we're typically told about and taught about. That, what you eat is what your brain is, and what your brain is sort of pretty much what you are, and how your brain is the tool and the organ with which you perceive life. Your experiences, your behaviors, your emotions, everything is your nervous system, basically. So I noticed, I think, when I started really cleaning up my diet, because my diet was never bad at all. Like I've been into health and fitness stuff my entire adult life, like hardcore, which is partly why I think I recovered so quickly, and partly why I survived. My attempt was, I had this solid foundation of health and fitness, and that I've been taking care of my body. But when I really started cleaning up my diet and removing really anything that as biohackers we associate with, inflammation, cognitive fog, mood fluctuations, disorders, hormonal fluctuations, all of that. I think when I first started eating wild caught salmon, like legitimately wild caught salmon, I think 4 or 5 times a week. Within the first week, it was like a switch went on in my brain. And that was when I started feeling my symptoms get better, my brain injury symptoms. And I was like, okay, I'm onto something. And so I knew enough about, the omega fats and how important they are for the brain. But then I just lit a fire in me. I was like, okay, that helped. What next? What else can I do? So then I cut out the sugar, the dairy. For a minute, I was like full vegetarian except for the fish, but that didn't quite suit me. I got very thin and sort of like wiry and lanky, and I just felt kind of weak. But I stayed on that track. And that just led me to neurofeedback and meditation. And that led me to, just cutting back on blue light devices and electronic devices. And that led me to, so I kept going further and further and further with it. And each time I incorporated or experimented with another treatment or lifestyle change, it was like, not only did I physically get better, feel better, but it was like my awareness and my consciousness kept expanding. It was like scaffolding. It was like I was building on this foundation and I kept scaffolding up and out. And it just got more and more sort of incredibly like self-fulfilling. I just wanted more of it. So that's where I'm at right now. It's really pretty tightly disciplined and clean lifestyle, because I've decided that my motivation and the benefits of that kind of lifestyle are well worth it for me. I remember what it was like before. I remember what it was like to be in deep, deep mental illness. And so it's definitely worth it for me.
Thank you for sharing. And Corrie, so the listeners can have a deeper understanding of the quantum leaps that you've made since your suicide attempt and coma 3 years ago, leading up to that event, for some time, you were actually living with agoraphobia.
Yeah. I was clinically agoraphobic for over a decade. So all of those formative adult years where people are, going to school and having jobs and making friendships and connections and relationships and all of the drama, I was literally hiding in a basement with, blacked out blinds or covering the windows. I rarely saw sunlight. And that's how I lived there were like little things here and there that would sort of take me up out of it for a minute, but I immediately would go right back into it. And I was clinically diagnosed, with agoraphobia. And, when I say that, people tend to think that just means I was really, really introverted. And I really have to emphasize, no, I was a lot of what you probably have seen in movies and books and TV. I didn't talk on the phone for years, didn't touch a phone for years. I didn't have a cell phone until the month prior to my suicide attempt. So, and I think prior to that, I had just been texting with one or two people on an iPad for like 6 months. So I was unplugged and off the grid as much as I think a person can be in modern society. And
And Corrie, your experiences have led you to now working with women, I believe it is initially, to biohack their heartbreak, where you're working with cutting-edge health and healing for relationship recovery and dating detox. And we've discussed your perspective that Esther Perel also shares, where people fall into the trap within relationships of expecting all things in one person.
mm-hmm.
And how it's really not healthy or realistic, and I'll take the standpoint from a woman at the moment, for a woman to expect a man to be all things.
All things in one person. Mm-hmm.
Would you like to share some of your perspectives on that? And what happens if we don't find someone to fulfill all of those things for us?
Well, first of all, that was such a huge issue and such a huge catalyst for my suicide attempt was my codependency, and years and years and years of trauma surrounding men, with men, surrounding sex, and it was the one area that I couldn't quite like biohack, So I was in all this self-development, self-healing, up-leveling in every other area of my life. But when it came to relationships and men, like nothing was really working. And that kind of took me off to like, I have some major trauma with this. I need to go in there and work with it and heal, and just not have anything to do with dating for I don't know how long. And that, got me listening to people like Esther Perel, who also looks at like evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology. Like, what did we actually evolve to need and want from other human beings? And our culture, our society is so counterintuitive to what we actually evolved to sort of healthfully maintain and want. And it's like we're square pegs forcing ourselves into round holes, and we're trying to make other people do the same thing. So like we'll go and we talk about how, the one person, your partner, your best friend, all these things in that one physical body. And there's really no biological foundation to that. There's no realistic, real substance to it. It's just a lot of conditioning, a lot of programming, a lot of being told that that's what we should want. That's what we should be looking for. And when it fails, because it's really difficult to make something like that work, especially in 2018, we blame ourselves and we go into a shame spiral and we think there's something wrong with us. We have to fix something. We have to keep, pounding away or healing this or doing that. And all based on that one person that we're trying to find. And it's just, it doesn't make sense. doesn't make sense for our brains, our bodies, our nervous system, or our mental health to be so certain that one person can provide all of those things for us. So I would just really, really like to emphasize genuine connection with just everyone and everything and animals. And, and it sounds very like hippie, but we can't biohack our inherent need for genuine connection with other people. We are a tribal species. We must be with each other and connecting with each other in community. But that doesn't seem to be fulfilled in these dating relationships. Just doesn't seem like it ever could be. So maybe we need to go back to like our real roots,
Yes, and we've also had the conversation specifically around biohacking and relationships. And when we're looking to meet a new person or an ideal partner, yes, there is that spiritual aspect or their inherent nature, if you will, that we're looking for in a person to join with. But there is also the hormonal aspect of what's going on during that time. So really having this understanding of what's happening on that hormonal level and whether there's been an addiction there in what it is that we're looking for to come perhaps from another person.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of power in becoming aware of that when we're getting to know another person. And the reality is that even if that person isn't aligned with us, with our values and what's truly important, that if things become too physical too quickly, the reality is that oxytocin is going to be playing tricks with the brain.
Yes, and it does a very good job of that. And it actually is so good at it that we don't even realize it's doing that because we think it's reality. And we're so convinced. Hormones are incredibly powerful things, and neurochemicals are incredibly powerful things. They are how we perceive the world through the tool, the mechanism through which we perceive and experience our lives. So they are, in essence, they're real, they're reality, but they have very specific effects on our behavior and in how we connect with each other. And if we're not aware of that, if we're not aware of the complexity of our brains and our bodies, just on a base level, and how our current lifestyles and lifestyle addictions interact with that biological basis, it's so easy to get confused. Like, it's so easy to not be able to be objective and to be, mindful and aware of what's going on in our brains and bodies. We're just constantly reacting. Until we start educating ourselves about what are these chemicals really doing and how are they sort of putting goggles on me and helping me ignore the red flags and, the inconsistencies and the little things that probably wouldn't work long term. But because we're so high on these chemicals, we just overlook it, especially as women, I think.
I agree. And there is that ability to trigger those feel-good hormones irrespective of an intimate relationship. So that can come, for example, through self-care and simply giving us a hug or releasing some tears, or through our connection with others in more general terms in our community.
There's one sort of universal thing, we can say as humans, we all want to be happy, but the sort of core root of that want and need is love. We want to be seen and heard. We want our existence acknowledged. We're not okay when we're isolated from other. We're not healthy. We're not connected to ourselves, especially when we're in denial of that. So, but I think where I'm coming from is that is a very real thing that we should never try to ignore because it can be disastrous. It's what happened to me. I tried to ignore my need for connection and almost killed me. But where I went wrong, and I think where a lot of people do, is seeking that connection in things that aren't sustainable, that aren't genuine, and seeking that connection in people who aren't committed to knowing themselves and healing themselves in genuine ways, in being seen, in being heard, in being real and truly connected. Especially men. And it leads us to keep trying to find a resource where there really is no resource right now in 2018. I hope that's changing. I think it could change. But right now, that resource is pretty limited, where as women, we're like trained to go to the guys. They need to do their own thing for a little while. There's a lot that needs to be done there with them.
Yes, I agree. There's healing to be done by both men and women on many levels. And there's this beautiful thing that I'm seeing at the moment through conscious relationships and conscious relating that's breaking a cycle of the past where we've seen that people were often drawn together or attracting each other subconsciously to heal each other's wounds. And when people take the time, give themselves the space to heal independent to their relationship, whether that's seeking external guidance through someone who's qualified to help them, as well as doing the unique introspective journey that's a part of that process, is that people can now consciously come together from a different place of desire and, yes, of course, support each other when a trauma may be triggered and a wound arises. It's not about us not being available to each other in our relationships at all, quite contrary. But when we can form a relationship from a place of being two whole people, then a very new co-creation can happen rather than being in a relationship from a place of need. It can now be created from a place of want and shared desire. How do you feel about that approach?
I'm all for it. Like, I don't want to tell people to quit forever. I'm not telling people to be celibate forever, to, join a monastery or a nunnery. But the healing, it's going to take different timeframes for everyone, because a lot of us have deep trauma that's complex and goes back to childhood and, followed us and developed over lifetimes. So if you do truly want to find someone to co-create with and be completely whole and separate unto yourself, but then collaborating with someone who is an equal, that's a beautiful thing. I think it's possible. I just don't know if it's possible prior to really getting into the nitty-gritty of how you work, what does work, what doesn't work, and the deconditioning and the reprogramming and the rewiring, prior to going back out to doing that, to looking for that. Because if we do that too soon, it's just the same cycles over and over and over. And we can't heal in the same environment that we got sick in. And I think Albert Einstein said something like, you can't solve your problem with the same thinking that you used to get the problem. So it's not a Band-Aid solution. It's not a new dating program. It's not a new way to love. It's not learning new love languages. It's not. That's all the same things that keep you in that same cycle. They're there. They will be there. They can work. But first, for that to happen, you have to go in and figure some things out. And also in the process, really genuinely connect, not just to yourself, but to safe people and places and animals. And, that's where the healing of the trauma comes in, is starting to recognize what is truly healthy and what does that look like and feel like.
Absolutely. And how do you feel, Corrie, we can approach women with relationship trauma who are still in the space of holding on to their story, which is very valid? However, they want to move forward, and how do we help them to overcome that without invalidating the journey so far?
That one's tricky. I'm not quite sure if I've even figured that out yet. Because acknowledging that pretty much everyone has some level of trauma means that you have to acknowledge there is a process, an actual established neurobiological process for healing and overcoming trauma, big trauma, little trauma. It has very real after effects in the body on a molecular level. And that's actually what was always wrong with me all of those years. I wasn't actually mentally ill. I was traumatized. I had complex trauma. And so now that I have that diagnosis, I'm able to actually heal from it. And I'm no longer treatment resistant, because we've really honed in on what the issues always were. It's trauma. And I think trauma is a big driver for what is seen as mental illness in our society. But when you encounter women who are still in that story where they've identified themselves with their trauma, which makes sense. Of course they have. I did. I still sometimes do. And when somebody comes along and challenges and is like, you need to wake up and get out of it and heal and move on with your life, that is incredibly invalidating for someone who has spent an entire lifetime in their trauma and identifying themselves with it. So that's where being trauma informed, I guess, for lack of a better term, comes into play, where we can be with somebody who obviously has trauma and know sort of where they are in their process, and then cater to where they are in that process. So for some people, they're really still deep in it. Like they're in that terrified fight or flight phase in their bodies and brains. And I know that I'm not skilled enough on any level to really be helping somebody like that. I need to be working with people and writing for people who have sort of come up out of the basement like I did and are starting to see the light, because there's levels. There's just levels to it. Eventually in the process, it's typical that you reach a point where self-responsibility comes into play and accountability and, taking action for yourself and only for yourself and not being codependent at all anymore. But that takes time and it's going to be different for everyone. And when we tell women with trauma to hurry up and move through your rage and hurry up and get over your grief, it's not neurobiologically possible. And it's a big point of frustration for me with self-help and self-improvement, that it's not necessarily trauma-informed. And the more and more we realize that people, women and men, have trauma in their bodies on molecular levels, trying to help themselves and improve, unable to fully do it, blaming themselves, it's because what they were doing and using wasn't necessarily trauma-informed.
Yes, Corrie, I agree with you. And I think that it's a very valid and important point, is understanding where people are at different stages of their journey and aligning them with the most appropriate practitioners at the time to be guiding them through that, whether that's a therapist, a mentor, a coach, or any other type of practitioner who's specialized in the specific area to actually guide the person through that process. We could draw the parallel perhaps to when we're guiding somebody through embracing deeper self-love, and there's a process for that when someone's been operating conditioned to have a closed heart space. So we don't just bombard them with all of this information and tools and expecting them to just immediately open their heart center, because they really just can't cope with doing that. There's a process to do that, and it's gentle. And as they release and open, they're also from a place of trust able to receive. And so particularly used with trauma, when we're healing the nervous system and we're healing deep cellular memory, there's a process to take somebody through to do that. And I really think that it's important that we see consistent evidence so that we're able to change the baseline before moving people in to a new place of being. And then through biohacking, neurohacking, consciousness hacking, yes, quantum leaps very much are possible. But I do believe that there's a process in which to embrace to take people there for sustainable change.
Exactly, because you're establishing that foundation.
Yeah.
That foundational discipline.
Yeah, and I can also very much see the beauty in finding our place in communities and building our one-to-one relationships outside of our intimate relationships, which really enable us to build foundations of trust with others. And then by taking this dating detox, people are able to rewire from a place of safety. And I do believe that when we're able to do that from a place of trust, then when we're challenged perhaps with a situation in a relationship in the future, we're able to actually take a step back and say, how does this sit with me? How is this aligned with my values? And actually see it from a place of trusting ourselves, which is a huge step in breaking a negative pattern for a lot of people.
It's that building up of that foundation. It does take discipline and it does take commitment, and it is really all about the self-care. That's a trendy word that's thrown around a lot, but it has to be the priority when you've committed to healing. And it's very much self-focused, but the side effect of being so self-focused is you do genuinely start learning about other people through yourself. You do genuinely start finding real, healthy, grounded, solid people who are on the same path. And it takes that switching of the lens, take off that whole, I have to go out there to find someone to do it for me, to do things. And you switch the lens and it becomes inward. Then there's the side effect of it all just opening up on levels you didn't know existed. And, I think that's exciting.
Exactly. I think that it's really exciting. I also think that it's very beautiful when people are taking responsibility for themselves so that they can have richer and deeper connections with others, and so that they can become more in tune with themselves, and right down to understanding how they're affected by things like their sleep. I mean, how important is sleep, right?
God, Amber, don't even get me started on sleep, because I've had some people in my recent past who literally tried to hurt my health through denying me sleep. And I'm like a mama tiger about my sleep now. If there is anything in my environment that will, especially with recovering from a brain injury, sleep is paramount. It's paramount for all of us, but especially with a brain injury. If I feel like my sleep is going to be interfered with, oh my God, no, watch out. I will cut a bitch.
Yeah, and it's also a beautiful thing, right, to be able to tune in when we're not feeling so great or we're feeling out of alignment and say, have I had enough sleep? Have I had enough movement? Am I eating well enough? Have I had too much screen time?
The thing about modern dating is it puts us into all of those behaviors and lifestyle addiction. And it's feeding on itself. It's a vicious cycle. So you're missing the sleep. You're eating the junk. You're drinking the beer. You're staying up until 2 o'clock in the morning, swiping on a dating app, talking to some dude, texting. All of that is, and then you're also being encouraged to do all of those things because that's what works. That is having consequences and effects. But because it's so commonplace, we don't tend to think of it as being detrimental to our actual cellular health. It has effects, and it will mess with our mood and our hormones. It will make us start to act crazy, so it's that's where the detox comes in, where it's put down the phone, just stop swiping on a freaking app and going out at 2 o'clock in the morning and drinking beer, all for the sake of a guy.
Absolutely. And I really believe when we're in a rock solid place of self-love, then we're really aware of what we are and aren't willing to compromise in terms of our values, for example. And I think that all of us in the single space are navigating this to have an honest conversation with you. So it's about when we go back into the dating space from this place of self-care, then we're looking to align ourselves with people who have shared values, and we're not then going out and, trashing our sleep patterns that have become very important to us, and perhaps drinking when we don't want to. And everybody has different values. So I'm not, advocating that everyone has to give up drinking or everyone has to be an early night person, but I know what my values are in terms of my health and well-being that are aligned with my entire lifestyle choices. So I think it's really important for people to take that break and really be rock solid in what it is that they want and need for themselves.
Exactly. And I think there's a real fear. There's like the FOMO fear that if you don't engage in those behaviors, if you don't stay plugged in to the food and the apps and the entertainment and the drama, that you're going to miss out. You're not going to meet that person.
Yeah, you are going to miss out. You're going to miss out on something that's not right for you.
Exactly. And it will keep you in the loop. All of you, your hormones, your everything. It's not, we tend to think we can separate out who we are from our body systems. Like when you move through life, you don't think of yourself as a brain. You think of yourself as you. But your brain it's very meta. Your brain is informing you of who you are, and it's also how you're interacting with the world. So like everything that you're doing in your life is having an effect on your brain, which is having an effect on every area of your life. So there's like a point where human resiliency can't keep up with the bombardment of our modern lifestyle. And things start to go wonky in our health, in our lives. And yet we're so adamant, like we can't admit that it's our lifestyles are partly because of our lifestyles. Like we're so averse to that. Mm. And I know it's not sexy to say or fun or fluffy, and it's not easy to market that or pitch what I'm saying as, this, pink covered book or podcast, and it's not beautiful, fluffy, sweet, loving language. It's flat out, here's what you're doing to your biology. Here's what's going on in your biology that we know pretty well so far. Science is just taking off in neuroscience because we don't really know much of anything yet. Here's what we sort of know so far. And within that, we know that your lifestyle behaviors are having some kind of impact on you. And that's kind of like, I'm so passionate about that. I want everyone to know about it, but specifically women who are so codependent on outward validation from guys. You're probably not going to find it there. So where can you find it? And it's like shifting focus.
Yeah. And, on that discussion of the meta, I'm very aware of the language that I use and how it indicates where I'm at with my mental and emotional state. And in using these apps, the way they're wired, it's either a yes or no in many of the cases. And I noticed that I was using a dating app, and I'm not about to make this conversation about whether I agree with them or think that they're positive or negative. I've used them as have many of my friends. However, what I did notice was that I felt really awful in my energy of just flicking through saying no, 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 no. And because I'm so clear on the type of person that I would like to be aligned with, then yes, the reality is there's more fum or no's than there are yeses. So again, then on this specific app that I was using, the women were the first to make contact or conversation with the man if they matched. And I often found that then these interactions can be just really devoid of any, real conversation. And because you're not in real time, it just can be a real drag amidst the day-to-day, or, people would just become desensitized within the whole space. So for me, it was really about feeling like, rather than this is, an exciting place of new potential, I was feeling like it drained my energy. And that in itself doesn't align with my values. So this may be a very different experience for other people. However, for me, that just didn't feel right for me.
Right. And it never did for me either. I mean, of course, I still did it, but I felt the dehumanizing aspect of it. Like it was like swiping on Amazon, shopping for human beings. And I had this pit in my stomach every time I did it. And I would come across a person and I'd be like, yeah, I don't think that that's somebody I would be attracted to, but I felt so gross, just like swiping on a human being. It was like, I felt like some weird sci-fi, like I was deciding the fate of humanity. Like you get to live, you get to die or something. It felt it was so dehumanizing and like narcissistic. And I can't do it anymore. I just absolutely cannot do it anymore. These are human beings that we're just, it's mind boggling the level to which we have become so disconnected from each other as human beings. The empathy has just been eroded and we're all acting like sociopaths in little ways. And it just, I can't do it anymore. Can't really encourage anyone else to.
Yes, and also that attitude that's come into play where a lot of people right now justify behaviors by saying, well, everybody else is doing it and that's just the way it is. And, you know, I think that a lot of people are also experiencing disconnection in society. We can see that. And people are experiencing anxiety greater than ever before. So along with all of our day-to-day pressures, how anxiety-inducing are these behaviors like ghosting and just disappearing and treating people like they're disposable? So I think that it really is for us all to take responsibility in saying, how does this make me feel when I'm in this space? If it works for you, that's great. But if it doesn't, actually having the courage to pull away and trust that you will meet the right person at the right timing through other channels, and actually give yourself the space to do that from a place that feels healthy to you.
When you go inward and do the work with yourself, you gain that trust in yourself. You see how wise you are at the root of you. You see how brilliant and creative and loving and all of these amazing things that you can't get access to when you're out here living in the cycles. When you can really go in, you start to be able to really trust that it's going to turn out better than just fine.
Corrie, what role do you feel women might have in encouraging men to develop themselves as whole people? And do you feel that it's part of our feminine nature to help guide men toward embarking on that journey for themselves? And what are some ways that they perhaps can be encouraged to do that?
Yeah, and that's sort of been coming up a lot. Just very recently, there was something going on. I don't actually really follow news feeds, but like this kerfuffle came across my feed when I was like doing some research, and it was something about like, women being praised for rescuing men from their own mental health issues. And then the backlash being, women are not rehab centers for men. Like if they have their shit to deal with, they need to deal with their shit. Women cannot clean up their messes anymore. That is codependency. That is abusive and toxic for everyone involved. So like, how can we effectively challenge men in ways that they've never really been challenged before? We find, I think you agree with this, that self-help and self-improvement in general, when it's marketed at men, it tends to focus on their physical self. It can also deal with some of their mindset stuff, but it's always about optimizing themselves. It's always about becoming amazing, stellar, sexy, get ripped, get the girl kind of a angle. Whereas with women, when self-help is marketed towards us, it tends to be about us fixing what's wrong with ourselves. How to put the onus on us to fix everyone and everything, including ourselves. In direct ways and in indirect ways, that seems to be the feel of it. So how can we pierce through what are essentially centuries and millennia of conditioning for men about optimizing and being this superhero to challenge them to face their trauma and their wounding, because they must absolutely. Yeah. How can we do that in a way that's effective, that they don't immediately just shut off their phone or just roll their eyes or immediately fall back into the defensive behaviors of that's fucking dumb or you're gay or whatever, that they feel like it's genuine, that they feel like they can be safe enough to commit to something like that, to be vulnerable in the ways that are effective for them. I don't necessarily believe in encouraging them to join circles and get naked and openly weep with each other. That can totally work. But it's my challenge to them is to find what works for you, but legitimately find what works for you. Don't find something else that's just going to make you more of a douchebag. Like, go in there, and it sucks and it's scary and it can be lonely, but that's what has to happen. And there will be women there who are going to be like, right on, keep going. You're on the right path. It doesn't have to be this all or nothing thing where men are immediately turned off by, these challenges and these calls to heal and do inner work. And the defensive response that they have, that's also ingrained. That's very much, a trauma response for them. So like figuring out ways to challenge men to actually do the emotional labor that women have been doing with themselves for so long. I haven't figured out a way to really do that. I thought maybe like combining physical fitness with trauma healing, which is sort of what I'm doing with women, which is basically what I'm doing with women. I'm like a personal trainer for traumatized women. Doing the same thing with men because they are so gung-ho about optimizing their bodies and minds, but doing it in a way that's actually genuine and that will help them and not just like create more of their own cycles. I'm like so open to suggestions.
I do very much believe in breaking this cycle of codependency between men and women. And in a sense, I very much believe that that's about going back to the tribe. So I do really value the power of the circle. And for other men that will be going and doing some type of outdoor, Spartan event where they're actually encouraging and getting each other through the pain threshold to the very end. And for others, it will be going hiking or fishing, sitting around and having a chat around the campfire together or playing music. For different people and for different men, it's going to mean different things. But I think the key is for them to form safe, non-competitive environments where they're operating from their masculine energy, but in fact embracing their feminine energy when they can open up their heart space, open up their vulnerability, and really help each other to feel safe and trusted and to be able to function from a place of tribe in being vulnerable and healing their traumas. One of my closest friends for over 20 years is working with teenage boys and their fathers, and he facilitates rites of passage and takes them out for them to essentially establish from a very young age what it means to be a good man. So the more, and through that, the fathers, of course, will be learning and healing and connecting and growing in such vast ways. So we're actually doing some intergenerational healing through the work there that they're doing with these young men, which is just amazing. And I think the real power there is that when there's healing at that level, just as there's had to be healing of trust within women's circles, right back to the mother wound, then what can happen is when men and women in their whole being, embracing the masculine and feminine energies within themselves, come back together, they're actually able to operate from a place of interdependency and co-creation rather than of codependency.
Yeah, and I think another important element to that is educating about neurology and neurosexism. Like, it seems to be in neuroscience and in the study of neurology that it's very new, modern is very new. How different are women from men? And it's sort of seeming like not very different, really. Not really on a neurological level. I think there's been some real playing up of and misinformation surrounding how vastly different women are from men neurologically, and ascribing behaviors to those differences. But regardless of differences, hormonal profiles and everything, every human brain has the ability for neuroplasticity throughout life until death. And so men are just as capable of neuroplastic change as women. So if they do want to heal up and rewire and change their brains, they're just as capable. The capability is very much the same as it is for women. So there's really nothing there. There's really no actual physical boundaries there. I think it's just finding, like, how do you package something like that?
Yeah, and I think that communication is also really important in men and women learning to openly communicate within their relationship the things that are important to them, what they do and don't want, and what they do and don't desire, rather than making assumptions and then one person feels unfulfilled or dissatisfied, or the other feels like they're, keeping up appearances on something that doesn't feel right for them. And on that point that you raised between the similarities between men and women, for example, I know of private conversations that have happened between men, and men sharing with me some of their frustrations, for example, and in reality, these are the very things that women want as well. These are the very things that women say, yeah, they're actually my desires to have those experiences and feel safe in doing so. So whilst the trust and safety in men's and women's circles is super important, the trust and safety within the relationship of the masculine and feminine feeding off each other and bouncing off each other within a relationship, and the openness is also super important.
Yeah, and we're like, there's so much stuff around sex. There's, for women and for men, there's just like so much trauma, and we've gotten to a point where women consider themselves separate species from men. Like, we're not just all one species. Like, men are their own subspecies. Forgotten that we're all human. There's no real foundational acceptance that I sense of, like, we're just people. And as the same species, we're going to want a lot of the same things. So being in that place of, like, just being human, not having these structures, these constant constructs of, like, have to be this persona and I have to be that persona. Just be human,
Yeah, and there's something that I've also found really interesting in the biohacking and consciousness hacking space, where women and men within that space are generally very open to looking at things from a different perspective and experimenting essentially with themselves to see what results they're getting when they're trying to change something that doesn't work. So how is it that perhaps we can encourage women who are really interested in breaking their cycles and trying a different approach, and perhaps want to biohack their heart and learn what that actually means? How is it that we can encourage them to take a break from the dating cycle so that they can actually start functioning from a completely different way?
Yeah, it's that convincing that they need to take a break. That I think is the unsexy. I was talking about it not being sexy or soft or sweet or loving, or interesting or fun. To be told that you shouldn't play with your toys for a while. You need a timeout because it seems punitive and it seems like a drag. I think for women, like, there's this real allure there for me personally of doing something like that, taking a break that becomes almost hedonistic. Like, it becomes almost sensual, like really falling in love with myself. And in all ways, in every way, like learning, who am I really? What do I really like? Where is my power? What is my power? All of that. And you can do that not through just like, don't eat sugar and turn off your devices and stay away from blue light and electromagnetic frequencies, but also, like, and we were talking about this in the single biohackers group, the self-love, the masturbation techniques, the orgasmic meditation, all of that stuff. Like, women, so few women really know what they like in that realm, and they don't know what they're capable of in that realm. I have a friend who is taking a sexology course, and she's like, her mind is being blown. And this is somebody who is highly educated in this area, and there's stuff she's learning. She's like, no one knows this and it's real. It's just like there are layers to women's sexuality that have never been discussed. Maybe in like weird subcultures of pornography, but like just as a general natural conversation about actual biology not being had. So I think there's so much education there and so much self-experimentation and a real allure to like do that with yourself. What do you actually like and what do you want? And then of course the men, they need their education in that area as well. Because typically when we are having sex, it's usually not super great for a number of reasons. And one of those foundational reasons is trauma.
Absolutely. Trauma. And then I think moving beyond trauma, a very big thing is people feeling safe to communicate what it is that they really desire, what they want to explore together, and at what pace. And, you know, things that some people may feel are taboo, and then they realize that their partner doesn't think that at all. And so, you know, they can actually create that together from a place of safety rather than either from a place of shame or not speaking about what they want. And so it really takes knowing oneself to be able to go there to the widest expanses with your partner. And I think that's really where the exciting part comes into play in taking a dating detox and really exploring new dimensions of yourself. You know, we discussed in the other group some of the shamanic work that I did this year, and it was specifically working with a teacher around womb work. And, you know, this is our portal of creation. This is the place of creation.
And we're so disconnected from it.
And many women are very disconnected from it. And it's also a place of learning for men in terms of, you know, the value and the importance and the sacred space of the womb. But further to that, what I really gained so much value of was creating my own rituals and going back into this space of really tuning into myself. And at the time, I took a step aside and I said to my teacher, you know, I really kind of value being single at this time and not having to consider anybody else in this process, and really just try, you know, being able to just go to the depths of my exploration and to my wilds. And it's not to say that I couldn't have done that within an aligned relationship, but at that time, I really valued just being able to do that purely for myself. And then the other important realization I came to through that process was really knowing that when I come into an aligned relationship with the next man, there's no hiding this. There's no hiding the expanses of who I am when I do want to incorporate these rituals into my life, because that's just the nature of my being.
Because you will have gotten over codependency. And when we're codependent, we're afraid to set boundaries and say what we want because we're afraid of conflict and driving someone away. When we're codependent as women, we're too terrified of speaking up and telling a guy that he's doing it all wrong because we're afraid he's just going to never text us again. When you detox from all of that, you recover from codependency and you start to find that powerful place within yourself where you can start speaking up and setting boundaries and saying what you want and what you need. And that can really only happen when you recover from codependency.
And I think beyond that, what you're actually doing by entering the collective field is you're breaking all of these cycles of things that we've all been implicit in, following these rules that have been laid out by society that don't actually work for us. They don't work for our growth. They don't work for nourishing our soul. They don't work for our relationships. And you know, particularly when you enter the space of biohacking and neurohacking and consciousness hacking, if that's the space that people choose to enter, is that we're seeking to evolve and we're healing the things from our ancestry that don't serve us. So we have the beauty of the wisdom from our ancestors that, of course, we want to carry this richness through with us, but we also have a lot of the stuff that they carried with them that was just rubbish for everybody and wasn't serving anybody in their relationships. We now have the ability as a collective to do that beyond our individual work that we're doing in breaking codependency. Like, it's just such a beautiful thing when it really hasn't been working for people for a long time.
It doesn't work on a biological level. It doesn't work on a mental level. It doesn't work on a spiritual level, whatever. It doesn't work.
Yeah, well, it hasn't been working, but we're seeking to change that. And Corrie, you're such a superstar, and we could keep chatting on this subject for hours. We're going to wrap this up, and I'm going to share with the listeners where they can find out more about you and how to work with you. And I would really just love to say again, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. And I look forward to being on the journey ahead with you.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you so much. This is really the first time I'm sort of like publicly talking about my passion and my mission, and been like such a good opportunity for that.
Keep going. You absolutely know what you're doing, and this is such an important thing that you're sharing with the world. And I just really appreciate that you're here to share this with us, with all of your life and your amazing transformation.
Right? Yeah. Like 3 years ago, I was hooked up to life support. I'm talking about biohacking with you in Australia.
And these are special times. And I do really appreciate sharing your 3rd year Comaversary, as you've named it, with us. And I look forward to continuing to catch you on the other side. And thank you, our awesome listeners, for joining us to hear Corrie's incredible story of transformation. I hope it warms your heart as much as it did mine, and I really do value your time and energy spent with us today. If you'd like to connect with Corrie, you can head on over to Facebook via Biohack Your Heartbreak, or check out her blog at sherofitlife.com. That's SHERO fitlife.com. I'm Amber Ward at Life UnLtd. You have an amazing day, and I'll catch you again soon.